please make welcome Martin Gottschall.
I think I'm on, am I? Good. Thank you, Chris. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I did enjoy last night very much too. And a few people have mentioned that they felt the ambience of the occasion was just terrific. Yes, we'll put the slide on, please. The title of my talk is The Contactee Message, A Doorway to Other Worlds. And I think you recognize that symbol there. What I'm going to develop this morning is something that approaches that concept, only not quite in that way. I've been thinking about the question of contacting ETs for about a decade. I've even persuaded the association to buy a CB radio, and I've played around with antennas of miscellaneous descriptions, trying to work out communication protocols that would open communication into the skies and shut out communication from the planet around us. It hasn't led to the formation of an effort to make contact. I was still also thinking my way through the philosophy and the question of what can you offer an ET to make it worth their while to do something reasonable and serious with us? That kind of consideration too. So but it has led to what I'm going to speak to you about today, and I think I'm possibly getting close to the kind of thinking that might work. That is to say, that might encourage the appropriate ETs to take the trouble and talk to us. And one of the things that I always sort of sensed and didn't always quite know how to verbalize was that our understanding of the important questions, that is to say, the prevailing scientific and other understanding of the important questions of existence, are still so much in the kindergarten that we couldn't properly process and assimilate a serious contact effort. You just have to look at what the contactees have said and how little it has been comprehended by the mainstream of our society to see what I mean. Have you got the second slide on? Thank you. So what I'm going to try to do today is to take a perspective on the universe, what the universe is all about, that's somewhat beyond what you'll read in textbooks or hear from scientists. And then take a perspective on the questions, the big questions about the nature of life, and take a perspective again that goes beyond what you'll read from our scientific community. In order to see whether maybe they'll allow us to have an understanding of extraterrestrial contact or even higher dimensional contact that is worthy of their attention. That puts us in a position where we can begin to understand what they're saying to us and act accordingly. Now, many of you will know that over the past several decades, my main interest was in discovering the nature of UFO physics and propulsion. Mechanical engineer, when I first discovered that UFOs were real in the 1960s, I also discovered that all the science that I had learned and knew about could not enable me to begin to comprehend, let alone replicate, what people were describing when they described UFO sightings. It's completely beyond our science and technology. It was then, it may even be still now, although given that there's been 50 or more years of secret research by secret laboratories, funded by human interests. We don't know what the true situations in terms of human understanding of ET technology is. But I have made some progress personally as well, and at least I can talk to you about that because no one can make it a secret. I will use that, and I think I can help us to take a perspective on the universe that allows us to accept a few things that otherwise we might not be able to accept. Now, I can't go through this in detail. There simply isn't time for this, and you may not be interested to hear all the detail anyway. So I'm going to take huge leaps through this work, through my progress in understanding the universe, shall I say. And I'll give you some references for those of you who want to go through it in sufficient detail to satisfy yourself that it actually is reasonable and well worked through. So if you would put the next screen up, please. Okay. Higher dimensional. Okay. I've produced three booklets or pamphlets or whatever you call them. The larger of them is Reflections on Gravity, in which I outline my understanding as of the last few years on the nature of gravity and how that impacts on our understanding of the nature of the universe, the nature of reality, and the nature of time, especially. So I draw these to your attention. They're available on the website, www.acufos, etc., which you can see there. You may also purchase a copy at a special conference price as listed here. They're available. I'm sure there's plenty still left. If you want to go through the nuts and bolts of this, I do suggest that you have a look at those. But I'm going to take bits out of there and try and make as much sense of the bits to you as I can without justifying everything. One of the things I would like to draw your attention to, which is on the next slide, okay, is something I've discovered about the nature of time. On that page, and I'll use my pointer now, on that page is an equation. If you don't know what an equation is, see that equal? That makes it an equation. Okay? And there are three parts, three pieces, which notice a plus means add up, right? Add this to that, you get that. Okay? The first bit, F, stands for frequency. Every piece of something has got internal activity going on, which you can characterize by a frequency. When you move something, it has a velocity. And everything we deal with exists in a gravitational field. And that gravitational field has a potential P, which we all know how to calculate. There's no controversy on that at all. And what I've discovered is that the rate of time, which is characterized by the speed of light, is equal to a frequency term, a motion term, and a gravity term. And these terms are squared. As you see, that one's squared too, but the reason why it haven't got a 2 there, I don't want to go into it. Even that one is squared, see that? Okay. There are three pieces that make up the rate of time. And when you have more of these, you've got to have less of something else, because it always adds up to the same thing. The rate of time in our universe is a universal constant. In our established series of gravity, the internal vibration is used as the clock to measure time. It only measures time accurately if you're not moving and if you're not in a gravity field. At any other times, it doesn't give the right answer. So that's where my thinking, one of the places where my thinking diverges from accepted thinking. Now look down here at this equation. This is an equation for working out the distance between 2 points when you know the up-down, the left-right measurement, the up-down measurement, and the forward-backward measurement, the 3 dimensions of space. You want to know a straight line distance, you work it out in this way. You notice the similarity, okay? Squared, 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 squared. 3 dimensions of space, 3 dimensions of time. Time has 3 dimensions, just like space has. No wonder, even in our series of gravity, we speak of space-time because we can see the link between. Okay, that's all. We'll leave that then. Okay. Now, if on the next slide, I'm attempting to represent our universe as our astronomers understand it. You've heard of the expanding universe idea? how the universe is expanding, how the galaxies are moving apart from each other. So imagine the universe began as a dot here. It was what scientists call the Big Bang. Then it started to expand outward. Both space and time and matter all began, and then still ever-increasing part of a void. Okay, here is something, this space-time. Outside it you have a void. Is that word there anywhere? Okay, we should be. Okay, so there's nothing out here at all except emptiness. Then you have space-time, which is not nothing. And in that space-time you have matter and energy, which is not nothing either. And this is expanding forever, or at least expanding at the moment. On the next slide, I'm trying to show the same thing with a little graph. This axis should be labelled size, and that axis is labelled time. And I've also put here reverse time, which I will not discuss at any length. But the Big Bang begins at this instant, and two universes emerge from it, one in time, one in reverse time. That's a symmetry that's necessary, otherwise you can't have creation. That's all I'll say about it. At first, the process of expansion is extremely slow. Then gradually, as space expands more and more, the rate picks up. And we're here somewhere now, somewhere on this accelerating time. And that's been one of the surprises astronomers have had in the last decade or so. They've discovered the universe is expanding ever faster. They thought it should be expanding ever slower. It's been a bit of a conundrum to them. Okay, so it's not a straight line thing. If I may go back to, you put the next slide, please, we'll do it that way. Now I'm going to talk about the Big Bang again, okay? Only this time we're trying to get a feel for what goes up and what goes down, what gets bigger, what gets smaller. Here is a graph in which on this scale we display a property of space. It's a gravity potential P that showed up in that equation. It's a space property. A property that everyone accepts can change. All our scientists will agree that the gravity potential here is different from what it is here. It changes from place to place. And on this scale I'm representing a miscellaneous selection of properties of matter. For example, Planck's constant, the electronic charge, unit of charge, the definition of the lengths, and on other scales you have things like the mass at rest of a proton or an electron or something, a property of space called the electromagnetic constant. Here we have other interesting, but the speed of light, the energy it takes to create an electron or a proton or some other thing, another constant called Boltzmann's constant, which you use to calculate the relationship between temperature and energy. Okay, all of these many miscellaneous things all change in an expanding universe according to my understanding of gravity, which I'll call the electromagnetic theory of gravity. And this is what makes the universe a very different place from the one you find described in textbooks. When the Big Bang began, that line was right over there. See that dashed line? It was right over there. When the speed of light was nothing, or practically nothing, was moving. When the mass of matter was huge, very massive. When gravity wasn't there, when there was no gravity. See? Because now in our established thinking, that gravity constant is placed on this line. And therefore you get black holes according to our established theory of gravity and other such effects. When gravity varies like this with gravity potential, then you don't get black holes because you can keep lumping more and more matter there. It doesn't contribute to any more gravity, you see, because the gravity effect has disappeared. So anyway, the universe begins with that line there. Today, that line is now here and is moving, so that universe is expanding. This is the direction of expanding universe. And anything in this scale you can replicate by bringing in lumps of matter together, like neutron stars and so on. And anything out here is yet to come for us. Now, this defines the position of space-time that we live in at the moment. A point on this side, if you could go there, would be a void. It's space and nothing in it, not even space-time. A void on that side, a point on that side would be a void too. We are, on this diagram, we live, exist, and the entire universe we can see exists on this line. And as things progress, things change. The speed of light increases, the expansion rate increases, and so on and so on. I may have to refer to this again, Kate, so keep it handy, please. Now, you don't have to have just one Big Bang. I'm showing Big Bang again. A Big Bang that begins here, it began a long time ago and has already expanded out to here, right? Then some bright spark came along and did another Big Bang, and this has had time to expand to here. And another one was created that expanded to here, and that and so on. And one of these is our universe, and the other Big Bangs are other universes which are here. Okay, so for example, if this was our universe, right? At that place, this space exists, and that space exists, and that space exists. Can you imagine that space-time begins at a point, then spreads out, and continues to fill an ever-expanding void of space. And once you have a space-time, you can have in it existence. So the important idea is to realize that we are revealing the distribution in the void of different space-times, and recognize that within those space-times there is void again. You only exist on those circles in that representation. So we can think about multiple Big Bangs and multiple universes and begin to think how, when they exist simultaneously at a point, how we might transfer from the one to the other. And that's, of course, why this is important. Now, that same picture is now shown on this kind of diagram by a series of vertical lines. The oldest Big Bang is this one, the first one that happened in our scheme of things, as I've still presented it. Then later another one happened, another one happened, another one happened, and one of these is ours. Right? Probably this one, the youngest and most undeveloped one. So that's just another way of showing the same thing. And so this reality and that reality can be in the same place here. But to get from it, we have to cross a void in space-time. From here, it may be no distance, but we have to cross a void in space-time to get to this reality. And this can be done in one of two ways, at least that I know. But before we discuss it, you go to the next slide, please. Now, this is an esoteric idea I want to introduce to you. You've heard of heaven? Some of you have read of the seventh heaven, stuff like that. And if you read Frank Howard, the contact key, he speaks of the heavens of Earth, the Earth's heavens. Now, this is Earth, and concentric with our Earth are other realities belonging to the other universes I've just spoken about, the other space-times. And so we show them offset from each other, so the next space-time is a little bit bigger, as I've shown it here, and the next one is a little bit bigger. So in our atmosphere, there is another world, if we knew how to get to it. And maybe beneath our planet, there is another world too, if we knew how to get to it. And this begins to offer us explanations on what we call, the hollow Earth notions and so on, that are slightly different from holes at the poles and hollow Earth as it is in our dimension. But I won't begin going into that. So we have all these realities, and they are concentric with us. So when someone says, I come from planet Earth, they could be coming from here, or from here, or from here, or from there. So when someone says, I come from planet Venus, and we can't find him on Venus, it doesn't mean they were lying to us. Can you see that? It's just that our science didn't allow us to comprehend what they were talking about. And therefore we have to have meaningful contact with EVs. We have to have a vocabulary that's close enough to theirs so that we don't end up saying, oh, you must be lying. I can't make sense of what you're telling me. Okay? And again, when people make transitions, as they do, for example, at death, they move from one reality to another because it's a part of them which survives the death of the physical body. And when they have a near-death experience, they go through what they call a tunnel. It's a very prevalent experience because you have to cross the void between two realities. And in that void, there is no light because there isn't any space that carries, a medium that carries the light ray. You're in a blackness, an emptiness. Okay? The next one, please. Another way of traveling between voids is to have a vehicle to create your own space-time bubble, which can then exist in the void, just like the other universes that exist in the void. And that space-time bubble changes its gravitational potential from the value of one void, gradually, progressively changes till you arrive at the value, the gravitational point, the gravitational potential of the world you want to go to. And then you materialize there, then you're invisible then. If you keep changing your gravitational potential, when you're in that world, you'll disappear again, one direction or the other. So spacecraft can travel with one world, one universe and another, and manifest in our atmosphere, and they can equally disappear from it. And these sorts of things are routinely described in UFO sightings. And it's useful to have a physics that doesn't balk at notions like that. This is a physics in which the formulas tell you this stuff. Okay? It's not that I just bring ideas and throw them together. If you look at reflections on gravity, you'll find me listing about that many principles, and the rest follows. The same sort of mathematics you find in every textbook. And the physics is just as valid and just as sound because it starts with things that everyone agrees are real, but shows that we've overlooked something until now. Okay? So you can now begin to see how manifestation and disappearances can happen, and how an object can disappear in one place, then appear again in the next one. Because when this craft is in its bubble, it has no inertia. See, it's not moving relative to its space. It isn't moving. The velocity term is zero. If you could somehow give it just a blow at it, it would float away, even though it might ordinarily weigh many tons. So it has no inertia, which means it can change its speed extremely fast, very easily and extremely fast, and appear suddenly from when it disappeared here and be there in a very, very short span of time. Okay, so there is, if you like, a brief introduction into another way of understanding the universe. Now, if you go to the next transparency, please, Kay. I label this, notice I label this space-time turbulence. What about situations where the deviations in the gravity potential are really quite small, very little? Imagine there were, instead of one of these lines, there was a cluster of these vertical lines. So that if you move from one line to another, you disappear in this reality and appear in a very close neighboring reality. You remember the Philadelphia experiment where the United States Navy in the 1940s were trying to achieve radar invisibility for their vessels. That was during the war years. And conducted certain experiments during which ships was made to disappear. And they had all sorts of tragic consequences, but the object did disappear. And while it was disappeared, it somehow mysteriously did a journey of several hundred miles to another port, where it appeared again. It then disappeared from there again, reappeared again in its original site, as well, before the experiments were finished. Now, if you go back to that picture of a UFO inside this little void, you can see how that can happen. You only have to shift off this line by a very small amount, and you've disappeared from that line. You're now in the void. In that void, you have virtually no inertia, so very small forces can move you very quickly to anywhere, or to somewhere if you don't know how to control it. And it could be mind warp. There could be forces generated by the human mind. Okay? When you're talking about something that's lighter than a feather, even telekinesis can do things. Okay, so we can explain things like the Philadelphia experiment by considering what I call space-time turbulence. Another problem astronomers have is that they know that there must be matter in the universe, in our universe, that is about 20 or 30 times more than what they can actually detect with their telescopes. They call it the missing matter problem. Remember that one? Well, of course, see, here we have this universe has been expanding for some billions of years, as they calculated, but it's pretty hard for this part of space-time and that part of space-time to stay exactly on the same value of no gravity potential. There are local factors which can produce slight variations, and they move out of visibility with us. So instead of us seeing 100% of the starlight created by our galaxy, we might only be seeing 5%. So we only have proof of 5% of the mass of the universe. But then we study galaxies and the way things happen in there, and we know there has to be more stuff we're not seeing it. So it offers an explanation for the so-called missing mass of the universe too. So I think it's no small achievement to have a concept which will work at the scale of the universe and will work at the scale of paranormal things that happen in our daily lives. Okay, well that's the kind of picture of the larger universe I wanted to present to you, because I think it's closer to the way the ETs understand the universe, and therefore it's one point on which we can talk to each other more meaningfully than if we only talk to them in terms of the science that is taught in universities. I now want to pick up the next main theme, which is an understanding of the nature of life. So that's another one on which I think the ETs and our scientists are not at all in comfortable agreement. So here are two perspectives on the nature of life. The first one is the one that is fairly common amongst scientists. They think the universe began somehow, and let's forget how, and as it progressed and evolved, physical processes created what they call life. And their approach is to study living things and understand life by the study of living things. Now, it's not illogical, it's perfectly sensible for them to understand life, try to understand life by studying living things. But the inference of this picture, that the universe began first, and life has got its existence from the events, the physical events of the universe, and has to be explainable in terms of physical processes. There's an assumption built into this picture that forces scientists to ignore any evidence which is non-physical, which gives an explanation of life that is non-physical. That's where the big divide between science and religion has come about, basically. People who are followers of one or other religion, or who have an esoteric or sort of different point of view, tend to think in these terms. They naturally accept that life is more fundamental than the universe. They read Genesis, in the beginning God created, and they're comfortable with that concept. They place God in this yellow circle, and the universe is a product of that life. They exactly reverse what these people do. Notice they're both dealing with the same thing. It's just the attitude they take towards these things that are opposed. These people don't see any intelligence here. These people see most of the intelligence where those see none. Okay, you see that? So isn't any wonder that if you have this perspective or that perspective, you start talking to ETs, one of them might be more useful than the other one. And it's not the scientific one that's more useful because it can't even explain UFOs to us. And in fact, it has some very fundamental implications, some of which I'm sure you've read about and come across. For example, the notion of events in the universe, the notion that you can observe something and your observation has no effect on what's happening in front of you. It often seems to be true, but is it necessarily truly true? Now in trying to explain some of the paranormal discoveries by using quantum theory ideas, some people have already sort of questioned that, and you may have read about it. But another perspective is this, that it's a more holistic view and it's more consistent with a lot of experimental data, that the observer and the event are part of an entity. And you cannot put a great big wall between these two and assert that nothing that happens here can possibly at all influence anything there. Because you couldn't even explain what's that effect when people give you medicine and it's got nothing in it but you still get better. The placebo effect. You couldn't even explain the placebo effect with that thing. So the doctor says, this is terrific medicine, it's really good. And the patient accepts it, and about 30% of his improvement is due to the fact that he accepted that this thing can help him. Again, you're not surprised when I say that I'm going to demonstrate that it is good sense, good scientific sense to adopt this perspective rather than the other one. And the sources that I would like to refer to you, or refer you to, are fairly easy to come by. I'm just going to use one man's experiment as the metaphor for hundreds of similar experiments that have been performed over about 2 centuries. That experiment is described in this book, The Secret Life of Plants, and the experiments were carried out by a man called Cleve Baxter. This guy, Timothy Leary, was trained as an astronaut, and this book was published in about 89, whereas this one was published in the late 60s. And he takes an approach to these paranormal issues from the point of view of a highly trained and highly disciplined and competent physicist. Okay, so if you are of that mindset, you'll be greatly helped by reading how this guy went through the throes of readjusting his mindset to be able to accommodate paranormal happenings. So I'm going to assume all this without detailing it for you today. But I would like to, if you go to the next slide, please, to introduce you to Cleve Baxter. Here's the gentleman. He was a lie detector expert, and here is his lie detector chart recorder, part of his stock in trade equipment. In the background there is his pet plant. He loved plants. And the fact that he was fond of plants and had a strong emotional link to plants is an important part of my discussion. And here he is, he's performing experiments by wiring his lie detector equipment up to a leaf on that plant. Then saying, well, if I give it water now, it must appreciate, it must detect it somehow. I should see some response. That was his thinking. What can I measure about my pet plant? What he discovered, I won't take too much, and if you go to the next slide, please. This is the essentials of what we're looking at here. I tried to just take the rudimentary essentials of the situation. Here's Baxter, here's his plant, it's wired up to a chart recorder. And one of his experiments was, because he wasn't getting any dramatic results, he said, well, I've got to do something a bit more serious to this plant. What if I burn a leaf? And as soon as he thought that idea, this instrument started to rattle, the needle started to whip around and rattle away. And he said, oh, what's this? Then he proceeded to burn it, and nothing too much happened when he burned it. But he realized that the chart recorder was producing huge responses the moment the idea of burning that leaf occurred to him. And he went and repeated his experiments and definitely satisfied himself that the plant was responding to his intentions far more strongly than his actions. And in fact, if he was doing something fairly drastic to the plant, he would promptly go into a faint and just disengage himself, as it were, and let the terrible things be done, and then it would come back and sort of pick up life again, like anesthesia, exactly like what we do when we go and have surgery. That was the plant was doing. Now this is paranormal. That plant knew what this guy was thinking. That's paranormal. Okay? And then he said, well, what is the communication between me and my plant that produced these results? So he put all kinds of barriers between these two things, right? The plant and himself. And he could not construct any physical barrier, including distance, even hundreds of miles, that blocked this communication. His plant, he went off on a trip and wired the plant up, thinking that he would now see what happens, how his plant responded to his emotional ups and downs, etc. He'd come home and look at the charts. He'd go away and do this, and on one occasion he went to New York to celebrate New Year's Eve, and he had a few clothes shaves with his buses and other things, so he had a string of emotional ups and downs, which he carefully recorded in his diary in time. When he got home, he pulled out the chart and checked it out, and sure enough, the moment he was nearly skidded by a bus, the blind showed a huge spike. He was quite satisfied, and by getting other people to repeat such experiments too, that this plant was really responding to his emotional state, and there was no known physical communication that could possibly explain the link between him and his plant. That's paranormal number 2. Now this class of experiment has been repeated many times by different people and many other types of experiments with the same elements, the same paranormal elements in them, including healings and making seeds sprout and all sorts of things, have been carried out too. And there's a massive body of well-disciplined experimental evidence telling scientists you got the wrong picture about the nature of life. And they haven't yet been prepared to listen because they haven't, I don't know why, because they're emotionally committed to an idea and they're not willing to be scientific enough to change it. But that's what that Baxter proved, and that's the idea I want to put to you now. Okay, so he discovered, let me summarize this again. He discovered that the biggest response he got was to his intentions, that he could find no physical explanation for the communication between his mind and the plant. And almost any plant would do the same thing. And not all experimenters were able to replicate these results. And in fact, it's a bit like when skeptics have an influence on people who can do certain paranormal things. Put a skeptic in the room and his negative mindset and everything changes. Similarly, get an scientist who's completely wedded to his notions of the relationship between the universe and life, and he can't do the experiment. Much as he tries to do it, it won't work for him. And that has to be incorporated in any useful explanation of this phenomenon, which I'm trying to do in the next slide. I'm going to offer you a model here of a way of understanding this class of experiment, something which is universal enough to explain not just one experiment, but a whole plethora of them that contain these elements. There is, it's a hypothesis about the nature of consciousness. You can create a situation where the consciousness of this entity and the consciousness of this entity and the consciousness of that entity blend into a kind of supercomposite in which the consciousness of all these entities is accessible by each of the members of it. A kind of a super creature. While this link is maintained, let's say this is Baxter, that's his plant, and that's the experiment he was performing. We even give that the properties of life, right? But there's intelligence in it. Okay. When the experiment is going, Baxter, his plant, and his target, his purpose, become one consciousness entity. And whatever consciousness faculties Baxter had were accessible to the entire entity, which means accessible to the plant as well. So the plant can behave like it had a brain, like it could communicate telepathically, and do all sorts of other things, simply because of the relationship, not because of what the plant itself by itself is. Okay? So it's a much more creative concept about the nature of consciousness. Because every single day we interact with each other, we're actually creating something. We're sharing our conscious faculties in some way, certainly we do in a friendly association, and we're creating something that wouldn't have happened outside that association. Okay, let's read the rules here. We'll go off it. Yeah, the control has to be a self-conscious individual who can formulate a purpose of some kind. The sensor can be any living thing, it can be a machine. There's a whole bunch of experiments where a machine is made to do things according to the intentions of the control. So the consciousness link doesn't even need another living thing as we define living things in order for the effect to work. Although the effect tends to be weaker there, but you can repeat it more often and still get very statistically powerful data. Okay? The sensor is anything, the target is anything, whatever you can conceive of is your target. No problems there. The link are defined as a shared consciousness that is created by the control, primarily by the control. Each member of the link accesses all the shared attributes, consciousness attributes, or just attributes in general. That's why limited. Well, now I think this is, I've sort of mentally scanned through a whole range of these experiments. I haven't done an exhaustive check. I think it's not a bad model that allows you to explain all these hundreds of different experiments with one set of simple concepts. And as soon as you are able to accept that idea, you can ask a very important question. Is that connecting? Is it? Wait to these two. Okay, yeah, I'll forget what I just did. I'll return to this link, and we'll look at what it takes to establish a link like that. First of all, it's not limited in the sense that there are only certain relationships or certain interactions that produce it. It's universal across any relationship or interaction. And it does require a sustained focused attention and a sustained focused feeling, especially a positive feeling, a loving feeling. Baxter loves his plants. His experiments work like clockwork every time, because plants couldn't help loving it. He had this linked relationship with them. I just didn't know it. See? Our constructive intent feeling has beneficial effects and may be sustained indefinitely. Which is constructive, right? If you're well intentioned, if you're trying to do something positive, it'll have beneficial effects on all the members of the link. Now that's something that can be expanded, where humanity can have blessed the whole the rest of humanity in this way. Now on the other hand, if it's a selfish and destructive intent, it has negative consequences. It kicks back, believe me. And you'll learn by the hard way, if you wish. Now, we create and maintain links, many links at any one time. Every relationship and every interaction of your life is a link, partly or wholly formed, fleeting or long-lived, recreated many times after it dies, whatever. Depends on our personal habits and so on. Now, people who maintain a constantly growing link with their divine self raise the quality of all their other links. And that's the one I was prematurely picking on, if you move to the next one. Because if you can link up, if you can link together various elements into kind of a super element, in which there is a perfect sharing of all the attributes, then that is one way of linking up to divinity, whatever you may regard that to be, to something vastly better than you are. That's all it needs to be. And benefit from the whatever attributes that entity possesses, to become just like that. And you don't have to learn it, study it, repeat the exercise a billion times. You just have to expand your consciousness and let it flow into you. It's already real there. You're just putting it in a larger space by including yourself in the space which contains those attributes. So it suggests an entirely different way of approaching spiritual topics and spiritual issues. Now, returning to the question of contact, which is after all what all this began to be, I now offer you a model on which to assess contact. In my upper diagram, I'm describing history. And I'm here referring particularly to the contactees who had interactions with extraterrestrials, and they were voluntary participants of that interaction. Okay? So the ET visitor wanted to make contact. His target was human contact. Associated with the ET visitor was the ET world he came from. He has enormous links, multiple links of the kinds I've just described with his home world. Just as the human person who is contacted has enormous numbers of links with the world that he comes from. I've shown those two worlds. Because with him comes all this, and with him comes all that. You see that? So they form a kind of a super link here. So when the ET visitor made contact with humans, he put a seed into human society, which from then on was going to live and thrive and do things, make things happen. And that, I think, is one way of explaining why an ET would take the trouble to come here, acclimatize himself for many months sometimes, spend a few years on Earth working and traveling and interacting with humans. Why do it? So you meet 1,000 humans. Well, there's 6 billion of them. You know, what difference can that make? Because you implant a seed, which like weeds in the garden will grow in all sorts of unexpected places. And one of the consequences would be a response. Here we are. Maybe we'd like to say, hello, it was nice of you to do that 50 years ago. I really would like to thank you. And maybe we can get a bit past the amount of progress we made up to date. And here is a human's attempt to make contact with the ET. Now the control is the human, the target is the ET, and of course these two entities are part of the thing again, because the ET is still strongly linked to his world, and the human is still strongly linked to his world. And now, we can create new kinds of links like that, and let them evolve into something that can have very powerful and beneficial consequences for our world, as well as for us personally. And I'd like to suggest, offer this as a model, a mental model for contact with ETs that is close enough to reality, like the experiments we spoke of, like the nature of the universe and how ETs come here and the kind of worlds they might be coming from. That meaningful dialogue is possible because we don't lack such a huge body of concepts, we can't even begin to understand what somebody's trying to tell us, and therefore we call it ridiculous and a lie and hoax and so on. Okay, so that brings us up to date. And how am I doing this time?
You're fine.
I'm fine. Just how many minutes have I got there?
35.
Oh, I'm going really well. Okay, so just summarizing briefly, I think we're all at the situation where we have already created individual links to individuals, like friends, family members, and so on, which is my second list, inter-family links and inter-group links. We all belong to various groups of people. And in our day, a lot of cross-cultural links are being established. We're trying to remove a lot of the evils associated with prejudices by establishing positive cultural links. Australia is trying to be, what do you call it, a multicultural society. We love Italian and Greek and Egyptian and Lebanese foods, so on. We're doing those sorts of things already. And we're in the throes of establishing interracial links, aren't we? All this talk about, politically proper stuff and so on, is to try and minimize interracial conflicts and bad feelings. So now I think we can, as we do these things and as we apply ourselves to these necessary processes of transforming human society, we're also, I think, in a position to recognize and to take the larger step of starting to build relationships with extraterrestrial societies. And that's what contact is. The contact response is really about for us. Now, and this kind of response is valued by the ETs too, because remember, it becomes a blending. And it works in both directions equally. And it isn't just we who benefit from it, the ETs benefit from it too. So it's mutually beneficial. We can rely on them to be willing to engage in such contact if we go about it in such a way that we're making sure we benefit from it and they're not just wasting their time. So I have no doubts at all that a well-planned and sincere effort will not be ignored by the other side. In fact, I'm convinced that when those ETs came and established contact with humans, they put in place some kind of device that was waiting there for a response. It might have only been a computer or something, but it was a telepathic one. And they would have known when we were ready to respond. And they would have made provision that if the guys who made that initial contact weren't available, somebody else would be jumping in their place and doing it. So they're waiting, and we have to take this step. And you notice we don't need the approval of the government. We don't need the approval of the scientific community. We don't need the approval of the churches. We just go and do it. So it's the sort of thing we do every day. We have a perfect right to do, and luckily no one can really stop us from doing it. So it's quite proof against the cover-up as well. In fact, it will, if we did it well enough and long enough, it'll destroy the cover-up. But everything we need to know, the ETs will tell us. And there's a lot of stuff that the cover-up covers up that we can very well do without. We don't need to know. Okay. So here my offering of ET contact guidelines. I think I read it from here. I tend to get left to right inversion problems when I look that way. that a consciousness link is a subjective experience that creates physical effects. Just like those experiments with Baxter produced traces on a chart paper, but totally physical effect. So consciousness links have that power. They can heal, they can change outlooks, they can make even physical, they can even make stones and marbles do things. They may take many forms, of which the earliest might be inspiration. Now, one of the things we are not resistant against is to be inspired. We welcome a new idea or a good idea. We're quite happy with the inspiration of that kind. It's probably the first thing you'll notice if you practice this kind of contact. You get lots of good ideas. They work out so well that you're surprised that you could have got such a good idea in one hit. And I think we need to cultivate an open, disciplined mindset so we can accept new information even if it seems to conflict with what we think we already know. But we're also disciplined enough to study it dispassionately, okay, to really give it a good assessment. We don't want to be fooled by our own ego. We don't want someone else to mislead us. We want the real thing, so we have to be disciplined about it. And we're always making statements that's going to be substantiated. That is important in that if you say something which is perfectly true, but for which you have no kind of proof, there'll always be a skeptic somewhere, or a person who thinks you're getting off the rails and have to bring you back to reality. And the reaction of that to your own personal progress will be detrimental. So it's better to keep your mouth shut. You're going to make claims that you can't back up. Just don't do that. But if you can back up your claims, don't let anyone intimidate you. That's the other side of the same coin. Because if you can back up your claims, if they won't believe your evidence, like people didn't believe Baxter's evidence no matter how good it was, that's not your problem anymore. And it's not going to be a reaction on you anymore. So there you are. That's my offering on my work in progress on the whole question of contact. Maybe in a few years I can speak about it again. Now, there was another piece to my talk that I've been of two minds all along, and I think I'll probably not take this any further now, but when you accept the possibility of making contact with higher intelligence, which I've called divine or better than us or whatever, there is a possibility of this higher intelligence communicating to us and offering us ideas and concepts that end up working very well, that save us a lot of work and trouble. But I think I'll leave that because it's my very personal approach, and it may not be necessarily be the good timing to offer it to you. You may think, oh, you guy's an idiot, he was talking sense into it now. But I think I just put it all in the waste basket after. So rather than risk that, I think I'll stop here and I'll take questions.
Does anybody have any questions? I had one. Why didn't you tell them about Baxter's experiment with the saliva?
Oh, yes. Simply because
You're far too polite to tell them. I'm going to
No, I tell them I'm not too polite for that. No, that wasn't it at all. I didn't want to get sidetracked. My wife tells me, I'm sure she's right. Give me half a chance and I'll go off on a tangent, you know. And then I'll lose time and not get to the end of my intended presentation. That's why I didn't pick it up. Yes, one of the strongest responses, one of the easiest responses to get is to get some semen from a man. And hook it up to, I don't know how you can hook a single cell to a couple of electrodes, but it's obviously possible to do it. Hook them up in some way, and that semen cell will track the emotional ups and downs, especially sexual emotional ups and downs, of that individual, tremendously powerfully. Can be miles apart, the response is very strong. Of course, as the cell dies, the response dies too. Okay? I did say it.
No.
Oh,
it was the secretary. He wired up his secretary's saliva. on
That's the same thing. Yeah, they're using the light cells in the saliva.
But the interesting thing was that he could actually go into the office on the Monday and tell when she made love over the weekend by what was on the graph.
Well,
that was interesting.
I did say, didn't I, that almost anything was good.
In relation to your heaven and earth theory,
Yeah.
did anyone see I think it was SBS, it was a 1-hour documentary on a lady who had a very bad brain aneurysm, and they were going to take the back of her head off. Did anyone here see that? No, I'll run through it very quickly. They killed her. The only way they could get the brain aneurysm was to actually take the back of her head off. And to do that, they had to actually kill her. So they took all the blood out of the body, they recirculated everything, and she was there inert and dead. Every living thing wasn't working. Everything went to nothing. They brought the body right down. They froze her down. She was dead. They took the back of her head off. They took the aneurysm out. They put the back of the head back on. And she recovered, and the next day she's in the recovery area. The doctors have come in, and they were talking to her, and they said, you know, can you move your toes, can you do this, can you do that? Yes, I can do all those things. And she said, aren't you not rude when you're operating? And they said, what do you mean? And she then told them everything that happened throughout the operation. You fancy that nurse, and you pinched her bum, and you did this. And they're just gobsmacked. This woman was dead. How could she possibly know? But she did. She knew everything that went on in that room. And she even described, thank God you didn't use the scalpel you dropped. Because they dropped one, you know. But she knew it all. So the doctors then have this problem, and they're now researching in America, the Netherlands, and in the UK. They're researching the fact that this woman was dead, and part of her memory was fired up when she came back to life by something else that wasn't part of the brain. And that's the bit they're interested in. Of course, we're all interested in that. Yeah, you're fine.
That's sort of trying to influence where you're actually leaving off is the part that I'm interested in.
Where you're leading off is actually where I'm interested in the whole thing, because I think that when you come to this understanding, to me personally, that's when it really begins to make sense. Because when you come from a higher understanding of what you're talking about there, to me, is where extraterrestrials can really make sense. I mean, it's hard to interpret it from a limited point of view, but when you take a grander view, then it really begins to make sense.
Well,
Would you give us a couple of minutes just on the tie-up of this part, how it ties into what you've been talking about here?
Well, one thing I'd like to make is that if you notice the contactee accounts, in the case of the contactees, almost in every case, the ETs acknowledged the existence of a supreme being. But they didn't go any further. In Adamski's case, he was once shown a picture, and they called it their image of ageless life. And they said, we meditate on this picture when we do our spiritual exercises or whatever. They didn't say that, they implied it. They were careful not to teach their religion or their practice to us. I think because we've been deceived and waylaid by fanatical people proposing this or that religion so often that as soon as anything resembling that comes up, the blinkers come down, the defense mechanisms come up, and you can't get any further. And you just close the door to what they might have otherwise accepted. That's one. Before you ask Colin, I think I did say, didn't I, that the tunnel experience in near-death experiences is the transition between our reality and the next one, when you're in the void where there's not even space-time and there's not even light. So there's nothing coming your way. You're in a total void. And in this total void you can travel at any speed. The speed of light ceases to have meaning. You're not in a medium that has the speed of light limit. You're in the void, and all the intergalactic and other travel happens in the void. And you've got to make sure that even that is managed somehow, like air traffic control, so that you don't have near planets in particular, so that in the void two craft don't collide and do something terrible.
We have another question, you better answer.
Yeah, before that, Colin had his hand up. but you're such a courteous lady.
I'm not to show you.
Okay, I withdraw from that. You decide, please.
And Colin Duncan has already booked in before you. But I wanted to ask you about your thoughts in regard to those links of what we might link up with when we read the contactee literature, how those links might play themselves out.
I believe that my progress in my understanding of physics owes a great deal to this kind of inspiration. I don't know who it was, but I remember times when I practically turned around in a room with no one there and said, thank you, because I realized that something had just dropped into place. And these things have dropped into place, and over years I take them further and further and further, and they keep working. They don't fail somewhere on the way and reach a dead end. Now, I think this is remarkable. I've invented so many other ideas, and they always have their crunch point somewhere, and they end up being not really any use. But then there are those ideas which at first didn't seem too useful. There was this particular point when I asked myself, is it possible to change the speed of light? Because the doctrine is the speed of light is the universal constant and so on. And at first I didn't get anywhere, but eventually it became the cornerstone of an entirely new view of the universe. This is, I think, an example of inspiration.
I'll now tell you the rest of the story. Whilst the woman was dead, she went somewhere else. And she met her mother. She met her uncle, Tim, I think it was Tim, who taught her to play the guitar when she was 14. And she met Grandma and a few others and some dogs for some reason. Had a lovely time, and this is the bit that really got me, was that she didn't want to come back. And Uncle Tim, what she said was, Uncle Tim put his arm around me and said, come on dear, you don't have any choice, we've got to think of the children. He took me back to the theatre with his arm around me, physical. We got there was the back of my head, looked revolting, all that blood, I didn't want to go anywhere near it. And Uncle Tim gave me a little shove, and I slipped back in. He gave me a little shove. Interesting. So, that's the story. I thought you'd like that.
Thanks, Martin. That was a really good talk. I'm very pleased to see some of Cleve Baxter's research come out. I have a question of a completely different nature, and I was a bit reluctant to take the topic away from where we're going, because I think it's very interesting and very relevant. My question is relating to your, towards the end of the talk, you were mentioning about conscious contact with extraterrestrials. I've just finished reading Stephen Greer's latest book, Hidden Truth and Hidden Knowledge, which is an absolute must-read, I've got to tell everybody. In there, he details his early life about his close encounter protocols. It struck me that there are very few efforts that I'm aware of where a group has sat down consciously intending to unite in literally a united invitation to extraterrestrials out there. My question is, number one, has your organisation or any organisation in Australia ever attempted this, and if so, what results were there? And if not, I would be most willing to donate space in Nexus magazine to tell the whole of Australia of any united date, time and concept that's being put forward, because after reading what Greer went through and speaking to other small groups where one or two people have combined their invitational, emotional energies to someone out there, they always get results. So I'm suspecting is if you've got a group of 10 people or 100 people who are emotionally united on a goal or an outcome, I would suspect the results would be quite spectacular. Now Greer is claiming that some of his results were manifested in the form of very large-scale sightings where thousands of people saw things floating in the sky, media reported on them, etc. And that's with a group of 5 people. So, I'd like to know what's the potential for that to happen in Australia.
Well, first of all, there is one instance where a group did just what you suggested. You'll find it reported in George Hunt Williamson's book, The Sorcerers Speak. It's basically a diary of the communications between a human contact group and an ET contact group. And those human people really wanted consciously to make contact, and that was successful. And some very interesting physics came through that contact that proved to be very useful to me, for example. Now, I don't know of any other. Well, first of all, there are people who channel or somehow or other outline something that's come to them, which they claim is from contact with ET. These are generally individuals. I don't know of a group, but I don't expect to learn of them, because I think if I were involved in such an effort, there would be a period of time for which it's fairly, for which I want secrecy, basically, because the people who most want to come to it are the ones who don't want it. They're driven by ego factors, and they'll just knock it up for you. So
surely if you coordinated an invitation, a carefully worded invitation, and put it out to everyone in Australia, it doesn't matter where you would be physically. If you specified a date, time and place, maybe. Anyway, the offer is there. If anyone wants to organise it, we'll promote it.
Well, that's initially. I mean, eventually the object would be to go public with what can be backed up, right?
Okay. I think we need a meeting. Look for it in the UFO Research Queensland magazine. We'll make a date. We'll all think about it.
Chris,
yeah. You can answer Duncan's question.
Duncan, where are you? Come back.
We really got to start thinking about rounding it up. I've got a couple more questions.
You there, Duncan? Or have you been at Duncan? There. Duncan, hello. Over here.
He's here.
I'm down the front. Back in the 90s, when I was involved with UFO Investigation Centre Queensland with Rob, we went out on a night watch to Gatton, and we had 13 people, and we tried to make contact. We did have unusual occurrences, didn't see any ETs or aliens, but there were unusual occurrences that when we wrote our reports the next morning, we had similar dreams and similar markings on our fingers, which I'll talk to you about that later. And also the Brisbane Planetary Activation Group, which was active in the 1990s under the Story Bridge at Yungabar Centre. Over 250 people gathered to consciously meditate and bring in UFOs. Nothing nuts and bolts appeared, but people were seeing scout ships sitting over the Brisbane River. So there have been groups doing it. And also Lisa Royale in Arizona, who channels the ETs from Lyra. She also has a group that goes out into the desert and consciously brings in craft.
Okay, now we've got a question, two questions up the back. I'm coming to you. This gentleman here is next. And then we have to be very quick.
This is a fascinating subject, and it triggers my memory that when in 1963 at the University of Minnesota, I participated in an experimental study of ESP, and the University of Minnesota Psychology Department believed that ESP can be taught. And I said, well, so the whole thing was, we begin to document, put in video, in film, all the results. And I attended about 20 of these experiments that were based in exactly the way that you explained today, on how the brain is a $400,000 million computer that has nothing to use. And it says, the way that it is this, and this, and we start recruiting children from 5 to 6 years old, not older, not younger, and test these children and select these children. And out of this selection of children, 20 years later, we found some of these children who can communicate from America to Europe to their relatives mentally. And said the mother of this person was in Paris, and he, without using the telephone, said, "Mother, please give me a call. Wherever you are, give me a call. I need to talk to you." And the mother called in 5 minutes. Things like that. Out of these children who were taught how to find the door to do it. So it is, everybody can do it. It's a base of understanding. When you understand that it's possible and you know how to do it, you can do it.
correct?
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
There's a lovely story about the guy in Africa who was building some roads, and he had the guys from the little village come with him, and they got further and further and further away from the village, so they used to camp out. And every Sunday they'd go to the baobab tree, the nearest one, and talk to their wives. And the wives would be back in the village in the baobab tree talking to the husbands. And the engineer said, well, why do you use the baobab tree? Why don't you use the telephone? He said, the tree's free. I do it all the time. Where were we? You were the first up there. We've got you, sir. I'm coming back.
Yeah, just two things on that. First thing is, the Indigo Star children sort of concept that's coming forwards now. It's quite amazing that they have really clear telepathy. I've dealt with a couple in Adelaide, and when you're actually doing energy work with them, or they walk up to speak, especially there's one little girl that I worked on a few years ago, they actually open their heart, they actually dial into your frequency, and it's like they're talking to you through their heart, not using their mind, and direct conversations continually, like through the whole session. And that's happened with two people in Adelaide that are what I call like star children.